It will come as a surprise to almost no one that I discuss unconscious bias with my clients who are women leaders. If you haven't heard the term before, unconscious bias, also known as implicit bias, is often defined as prejudice or unsupported judgments in favor of or against one thing, person, or group as compared to another. And it is typically done in a way that is considered unfair. Research suggests that unconscious bias occurs automatically. The brain makes quick judgments based on past experience and background. As a result of unconscious biases, certain people benefit and other people are penalized. We all have unconscious biases. Men and women, young and old, people from every ethnic background and every socioeconomic class. If you are able to catch your biases and challenge them yourself, great. But it's not likely to go down that way. It's more likely someone else will point your biases out for you. This comes back to the fact that these biases are unconscious. You're making judgments without realizing it. It is largely with the help of others that these blind spots come into your awareness. Becoming aware of and removing your unconscious biases takes an openness to hear someone out. It takes reflecting on what they share with you and considering behaving differently going forward. For many of us, critical feedback causes our defenses to go up. That's a natural human tendency. Because of this, it takes courage to point an unconscious bias out to another person. How the feedback is delivered matters if you want the other person to take in the feedback you are sharing with them. As a leader, you want to keep this in mind as you're preparing to talk to another person about an unconscious bias you've observed them display. This is exactly what came up in a coaching session I had recently with Jamie, a member of this community and a member of the military. The unconscious biases and others that are typically experienced by women leaders is around their competence. Even though women leaders score higher on competence than their male counterparts, women are still considered to be less competent than men. And they're considered to be less competent by men and women, right? Again, this goes back to we all have unconscious biases, and this is something that comes from our culture, not from our gender. This unconscious biases around women being less competent than men is why mansplaining occurs. And it's why women leaders' reports and decisions are more likely to be questioned and second-guessed. How do you deal with this without losing your mind or your temper? Well, listen in. In this conversation, Jamie shares her experiences and ultimately talks through the solution that feels right for her. I think her solution is going to resonate with you as well. On another note, in our conversation, Jamie and I reflected on the fact that if you're too upset or emotional when bringing up something that happened, it can backfire on you. Instead of addressing what happened, the other person becomes more focused on how upset you are, and it undermines your credibility. It wasn't until after we completed the recording that Jamie and I both regretted not also mentioning that the ability to express your upset can be a strength, and it is a strength, and it's not something you'd want to try to get rid of. There are times when it's not only okay to be emotional, it is in fact needed. If you are new to the Women Taking the Lead podcast, hello and welcome. I'm Jody Flynn. I'm an executive leadership coach, speaker, and author. I am the current president of the board for the Maine Women's Conference. I have the privilege and joy to work with women leaders to hone the skills and the mindset that allow them to grow into and then thrive in senior leadership. My specialization is working with women who are stabilizing after their last promotion and those who want to be ready for the next one. It is my belief that for more women to hold positions of senior leadership, there are changes at the individual and organizational level that need to occur. Not only do women need to be trained and coached on how to operate at these levels of leadership, organizations need to change their paradigm of how the work gets done and what supports are in place for leaders to do their job. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, please send me an invitation to connect. You can find me directly at linkedin.com/in/Jody Flynn, or you can search for Jody Flynn on the platform. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I should be at or near the top of the search results. You'll see the follow button is prominent on my profile, but if you click on the more button to the right, you'll find the option to connect. Click on that and be sure to add a note to the invitation letting me know you're a listener of the podcast. I would love to connect with you and get to know you better. Welcome to the Women Taking the Lead podcast, Jamie.
Hi.
Oh, I'm so appreciative that you were willing to take the time to come on and have your coaching call aired for everybody. So for the sake of everyone who is listening, so they have some context of who you are in the world, tell us all a little bit about yourself and what you're doing for work and leadership.
Yeah, so I joined the Air Force about a year out of high school, so I was like 19, and I've been doing it ever since. So do the math. I'm only 21, right? Just kidding. So December will be 16 years that I've been in the Air Force. I've done a lot of different things, but primarily my job is working on equipment that could save lives. So it used to be called life support. Now it's called aircrew flight equipment. So parachutes, helmet, oxygen mask, flotation device, things like that. So in the event of an emergency, you have everything that you need to survive. Survival kit. And now I am an instructor teaching the new guys and gals coming out of basic training our career field. So like I said, almost at 16 years, I love what I do. I've been an instructor for about a year, and as challenging as it is with the new generation of younger airmen coming in, it is so rewarding in the mentorship aspect. So yeah, I really love it. It's great. I love being an instructor and just giving back. I mean, almost 16 years is a lot of knowledge that sometimes I surprise myself that I still remember. So like sometimes I'll say something and I was like, wow, how did you remember that?
Yes. So you are definitely feeling you're a subject matter expert, but
sure.
More than that, you're a leader now
Yes.
too. So it's that combined force of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny. You and I had chatted before just to talk about the potential of this episode. And I remember thinking like, okay, like there are certain times, when you might be in an office environment where you have to stop and put things in perspective and go, okay, we're not saving lives here, right? This isn't a big deal. Everyone take a breath, like step back. But you literally are saving lives. Like the work that you do could be life or death. So it's high stakes. Like even though you may not be on the battlefield, but somebody on the battlefield is going in there with the equipment that you prepared for them. So that's a big deal.
Yeah. And trying to get my students to see that at such a low level. I mean, after 16 years of doing this, I see the bigger picture, but how do you show them the bigger picture when they're just here like in entry level? Because I put myself in their shoes. I was in that seat at one point too, and going to my first base, and here I am inspecting these oxygen masks, and they're going out on the aircraft, and then this parachute just got packed, and it's going out on the aircraft, and then it's coming back to me for a repack and never got used. So how do you instill the importance of saving lives when it's a good thing they didn't have to use your equipment, but you worked so hard on that equipment that they didn't have to use? So getting them to see the bigger picture of it needs to be your 150% effort, because you don't know until you know that you have to use it. You know what I mean?
Yes. And we chatted about this before. This is the question you wanted to come and talk about, correct?
Part of it, yes.
Okay. State the rest of it. What, like, give me the whole picture of what you want to chat about.
So it's kind of a twofold. So there's the instructor aspect of it, of getting people to understand the big picture and the why. But then the challenge of the military as a whole that I've started from the beginning is women in leadership positions, which is why I was so drawn to your podcast to begin with, women taking the lead. Because I've been in the situation of, and thankfully it doesn't happen in the schoolhouse, because they're so young, so they look to me as the expert. But then I have peers, right? And those peers don't necessarily look at me as the expert. Some of them do, but I guess the twofold is getting people to buy in at the lower levels to understand the big picture, but then also women in leadership positions. As much as we've progressed, I still find myself, when I feel like I'm not being heard because I am a woman, because somebody will ask me a question and I'll give them the answer, but then they look for my male counterpart for the
Mm,
affirmation.
the nod. Yeah.
Right.
So
And
for
it's just
those who
like,
can't
why
see,
did you do
Jamie's
that?
like enacting that situation where they look over and go, "Really? Is that
Yes.
right?" Yeah.
And then
Without
once
saying
they get
it.
the nod, it's like, okay, cool. And it was like, why was I not good enough for you to just see that to begin with, or
Yeah.
like listen to me to begin with? So I've accepted the having to prove myself everywhere I go based off of knowledge. And that doesn't irritate me. But then sometimes I fall into the trap of acting on emotion because I feel like I'm going back to where somebody needs that acknowledgement of a male counterpart, even though that might not be happening. So I guess it's a twofold of how do you regulate that emotion, which we kind of talked about a little bit, is you start making up the own story in your head, and that's not really what happens,
Yes.
you know?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let me kind of make sure that I understand where you're coming
Sure.
from correctly, because I'm hearing there two different things, but I'm seeing a trend in both of them. So with the students, the goal is to get them to take the instruction seriously, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reason why it's so important to do this at 100% intention and
Right.
effort,
Mm-hmm.
100, all the time, even if it comes to nothing.
Right.
99% of the time, you need to give it your best effort. So trying to get them to buy in and take the instructions seriously,
Right.
but with, colleagues or maybe, other leaders, it's trying to get them to take you seriously
Right.
as a woman leader, as an expert,
Right.
right? Because you know your stuff.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be any doubt,
Yeah. Right.
but they still do. And this happens everywhere, Jamie,
Yeah.
not just in the military. It can be, I will say this, for women in the military, because your numbers might be fewer,
Mm-hmm.
right? It really stands out starkly when it happens to you and it's not happening to your male counterparts.
Right.
It still happens to women everywhere, but they see it happening to more women, as well. So it's like, oh, I'm one amongst many where this is
Right.
happening. This is part of the culture. Okay. And yes, you and I had chatted before about, we don't want to assume intention, from another person, because we can get it wrong,
Yeah.
right? Until we know for sure, and I'm also a fan of assuming good intent while we're addressing something that's off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Too, so without going much further than that, which one do you want to chat about first?
Mm, yeah, I think probably the leadership one, like with women leadership, and not assuming that somebody's just not listening to me just because I'm a female. Because 9 times out of 10, that's not the chance. That's not the intent, or they don't even know that they're doing it.
Ah, you've picked up on that already.
I have.
Okay, so there you have examples where you can say, I'm pretty sure this person is completely unaware that they're doing this.
Yes, and I
Oh,
actually had a situation where I had to address a friend. He was a coworker friend, and I automatically assumed that he knew he was doing it intentionally, right? So I had a negative response to it every time. Like we were um, equal ranks and everything, so we would always just like go at it, go at it, go at it, like
hmm.
And then finally one day I was just like, I wonder if he even knows. And when I brought it up, he was like mortified because he didn't even know that he did it.
Right.
And so that
Yes.
kind of made me dig into, and then it started making me dig into like kind of the whys behind it. And then I went to a PME, which is professional military education, and we talked about unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh.
Right. Right.
So,
Like it
yeah.
can be completely unconscious on behalf of the other person. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know this, Jamie, I may shock you. You may have learned this already. Like
Uh-huh.
women do this to women too,
Yes.
because it's not about men doing this to women. It's about the culture not valuing the
Yes.
expertise of women.
Mm-hmm.
So women leaders do this to other women as well. And and there's stories out there that, we can get really angry about it, but it's part of the culture, that
Mm-hmm.
we're just kind of taught this, like to second guess women, to make sure they've got it right. There's this myth that women just, aren't experts, or, we as women have been brought up to second guess ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? Be 100% sure before you declare, right? With
Yes.
conviction and confidence that you've got it right. Cause if you're wrong, right? So we even, can doubt ourselves sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Is very unconscious, and that, all that being said, we can be aware of it. We don't have to like it, right?
Yeah.
But making somebody feel bad about getting it wrong typically doesn't change their behavior, right? I was talking about this with someone recently. If somebody makes a mistake and we attack them for it, what we're doing is causing their defenses to come up,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so what we get back, right? If we come at someone with anger, what we get back is anger, right? If
Mm-hmm.
someone feels that they've been attacked, very rarely will you find a person who will go, oh, wow, I really messed that up. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Instead, what you're going to get is denial. That's not true, that sort of thing. And you've probably, I can openly admit I've been on that side of
Oh,
the
100%.
argument. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That
I've been on both
moment.
sides.
Yeah, absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
I know what I did was wrong, but you
Mm-hmm.
attacked me and that was wrong too. And I'll be damned, right?
Yeah.
If I say sorry right now because you
Yeah.
wronged me. And so it doesn't get us anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we come across as being just combative, and just, and it's not who we are at our core either.
So it's
Go
funny
ahead.
that you said the combative thing. So this kind of ties into the whole like women in leadership positions, not even in leadership. So when women act on emotion, they're being emotional. This is from my experiences, right? Like, I'm not speaking on behalf of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You're being emotional. It must be that time of the month. What, you must have something going on in your personal life. But when men act on emotion because they're angry because somebody did something that they shouldn't have been doing, and they walk in the room with anger, everybody snaps and listens, and oh, we really upset him because we didn't live to his expectation. But for a woman, it's, oh, you're emotional, you're this, you, like, it
Mm-hmm.
must, like I said, all the things, it must be that time of the month, those type of things. And it's like, why are we the ones that are acting on emotion? But if a man acts on emotion, it's okay, like, he's heard because he's upset about it.
Right. Yes.
And
It's
that was the
dismissive.
experiences that I've had.
Yeah. And I remember, like, being in corporate and getting feedback. Not myself, but the conversation came up about being emotional in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And for women, it was more like being sad or crying or
Yeah.
something like that. And people would be like, you're so emotional. But if a male in the workplace, like, had a fit, right, got so angry, he stormed out of a meeting or
Mm-hmm.
something like that, no one would say, wow, he's really emotional.
Right. Yes. No, that's never a thing. It's just like, ooh, watch out for him, he is upset.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yes, for women, it's, yes, the emotional part, and the crying part is always associated to, you hurt my feelings. But
Hmm.
9 times out of 10, when you're passionate about something, especially in the workplace, you're you're crying out of anger, not out of
Yeah.
sadness.
Yes. Yes. It's just expressed differently.
Right.
And part of it is conditioning because as girls, um, every family is different. But
Right.
I am going to say this generally,
Hmm.
girls get a pass for crying,
Yeah.
right? And boys get a pass for getting angry.
Right.
Right. So this has been conditioned in us that these are the appropriate ways for women to express being upset. This is the appropriate way for men to express being upset. And I can't tell you how many women I know and who have said to me, when I get angry, I cry. And
Yeah.
that's just how I express anger. And in my head, I'm thinking, because that's how you were taught
And
to express anger.
it's funny too, because the whole looking to the male for affirmation, I started really thinking about that. And I was like, when you think about our generation or older generations who were raised a certain way, the majority of us was dad had the final say.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about that, and it's just like, okay, mom said I could, but I had to wait for dad to get home to have the final say. You don't even realize that I might be asking you or telling you to do something, or you ask me a question and I'm explaining it to you, but dad has the final say, you know?
Yes, yes. And
So
I love that you bring up that example, Jamie, because from that perspective, if we take a step back and say, okay, we've all been trained to
yeah.
do this, right? This
Hmm.
just, and you're an instructor, so this is perfect.
Yep.
When you come across someone who has learned how to do something incorrectly,
Hmm.
sometimes you are now tasked as the instructor to help them stop doing it incorrectly and start doing it correctly. How
Hmm.
how do you go about that as an instructor?
Well, thankfully, I would say that the equipment and things that we work on, it's not a it's not a trade, I guess you will, or a work thing that people do outside of the military. Like
Mhm.
you don't really hear often that it's in the civilian sector somebody's packing parachutes unless they're into skydiving, right?
Mhm.
So thankfully, when it comes to equipment wise, it's not like being a car mechanic and having to break bad habits or something like that. So working on the equipment, not so much. Um, but I think just cultural norms, I guess, if you will, or more personality wise, do you have to untrain? I guess if you, that's not, I don't know if that's really the right word, but in basic training. So basic training is kind of the starting point in that is to break you down of the things that you've learned and what everything that you think that you know and build you back up to where we need you to be as the military. So we
Mhm.
just have to continue that on. So um, you and I kind of talked about it before, but knowing the why behind things
Mhm.
and as instructors being confident enough and okay enough to not get upset when somebody is questioning us because they're not questioning us.
Yeah.
They just want to know the why behind it. They're not questioning our authority. But if you say you have to march to and from class, well, that's stupid. I don't want to do that. Okay, well, if you say, hey, you have to march to and from class because if you don't, as a whole, you back up traffic around the entire base. And this is a real thing that has happened in my schoolhouse. And so then that light bulb went off of, oh, I never even thought of that because why would you think of that? So I think
Right.
when it comes to overcoming our own pride and not not saying something and expecting somebody to do it just because we said so, but being comfortable enough in us to explain the why in it, you get a lot more buy-in because like you and I have had the conversation where this generation has had the why right at their fingertips their entire lives.
Yeah.
So now you have somebody telling them, hey, you have to do these things, but they're giving them no explanation behind it. How many people want to do something that they don't understand why they're doing it? It's a waste of
Yes.
time to them.
So yeah. So anyone, for those of you who are listening, if you have millennials and Gen Z in your world, and we all do, try to think of a situation where you're insisting that they do something, but you're not explaining to them why it's important. How
Mhm.
How long do you think they're going to follow along with that until it becomes inconvenient and then they're like doing something else
Right.
because they don't have the why? They have to have the why. Okay. So now bring that into this situation where you're faced with somebody who's asked you for an answer, right?
Mm-hmm.
To report out what you know or what your opinion is, and then they look to a male counterpart to
Mm-hmm.
double check. How can you bring what you just said into that situation?
I think not taking it personally. I mean, taking that personal emotion out of it, right?
Yeah.
So I guess when I talk about it like this in a form like this, I'm like, yes, this is what I need to do. But in that moment, just like they don't know that they're doing it, I don't realize that I'm getting upset because they just look to the other person. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think that just is more of me being self aware in the moment, not after the fact or before the fact. Because, when you plan out a conversation in your head and then you're like, oh, I didn't say this and I didn't say this, you
Yeah.
know? And so in that moment, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do from now on. If somebody does that, that's fine because if he gives a head nod, okay, whatever, at least it's getting done. Like my intent is whatever I needed to get done is going to get done, and who cares if he gave the head nod? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why is that affecting me so much? And I think that's an internal thing, and I guess my thing is my what I need to work on is in that moment not letting it affect me. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So,
It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, right?
right.
Because there is a part of you that's like, it's not right and it needs to change.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get so upset about it, right?
Mm,
So you can work on both, right? You're
yeah.
still going to notice it, but you don't want to you don't want to take it personally.
Right.
Right. And that's a mindset shift, right? Reminding yourself, like, we were all taught this,
Yes.
right? And this person doesn't have bad intentions. They're just doing what they've always been taught. It's just a bad habit, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they're unaware of. And that will help you release taking it personally because it's not about you. Because I bet if you asked that person, do you not think I know what I'm talking about? Do you think I lack expertise? I bet you they would say, oh my gosh, where's that coming from?
Right.
Of
Yeah.
course, of course I trust you. Of course everything. When you call them on it, they would say 100%, you are the expert. You do know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So taking out that it's about you because you recognize that it's not. However, you do want to change the behavior, right? And make them more aware of it. And I say this too. It's a process, right? Like you said, like even if you plan out a conversation, you're
Yeah.
you're you're in the moment and you forget things, and the more emotional you get, the more you
Yeah.
forget things too,
100%.
right? And you get derailed by the emotion. So staying calm is important. But I would say this is probably going to be a process for you. And it's
Right.
going to start with walking out of the conversation, realizing it happened, being like, oh, I should have said something.
Mm-hmm.
But then here's my invitation. Go back to the person
Yeah.
and say, hey, I just want to make you aware that this happened.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, you'll be coming from a place of, I'm not blaming you, right? Because you're already be like, this isn't personal. Internally, you've got this going on. So it'll keep you calm, direct, straightforward. When you asked me the question and I answered, you looked to so and so to get confirmation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to change that behavior around here,
Yeah.
to some extent, right? You'll have the words to speak to the person that you'll be speaking to, but it'll look like that at first.
Mm-hmm.
And the more and more you do that, the more you'll catch it in the moment where
Hmm.
you'll be like, why did you just look to him?
Yeah.
Right.
But
To
I
get
also think
confirmation.
that you made me think about something else too is being comfortable with having those crucial conversations with the male that gives the nod,
Yeah.
right? Because in that moment he is saying that like, yes, I have the final say, right? You know what I mean? So
Yes.
it's just like
Yes. So it's
I
both.
work with a guy now who like, you know, he's technically my boss, but we're very supportive of each other. And he's very much so, if it's coming out of her mouth, then yes, we've already talked about it. We more than likely have already talked about it, right? But I've had issues in the past where I'll say something and then the male has to say, yeah, she's right, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, if you know what I'm saying is right, just leave it at that, because
You
now
don't
you
have to
just
say
had to have
anything.
that one up of, yes, that she's right. Now listen to me, even though you just said the same thing.
Yeah.
So, and that's another thing that I think I've had to have that conversation before, but it's an uncomfortable conversation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes.
when you do this, you make me feel like this. And so again, that goes back to having that conversation when my emotions are lowered. Because if I do
Yes.
it in the moment, then, oh, you're just being emotional.
Right. And it doesn't come out right when we're emotional,
Yes.
right? I'm not going to say, and I want to put a qualifier here, like little star, read below,
Yeah.
if you're in a situation where emotion is absolutely appropriate, be emotional, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are certain situations where that is the appropriate thing, and the right thing is to just show your emotion. But there are some situations where the words you say will have more impact if you're not so emotional, especially if you're in a situation where you'll get dismissed if you're
Mm-hmm.
too emotional,
Right.
right? And you're trying to create change, and unfortunately, we have to
Right.
manage our emotions to
Mm-hmm.
create change in certain situations. So yeah, you're talking about two uncomfortable conversations
Yeah.
to have, right? And
Yeah.
I know it can feel sometimes like, oh, why do I have to be the one who does this?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But you are the change maker,
Yeah.
right? You're going to make a difference for all the women who come after you. There is so much that can be gained by listening to what another woman is going through and to understanding the strategy she will implement to overcome the challenge she is faced with. For this reason, I would love to keep doing more on-air coaching calls on this podcast. If you are a woman leader who's been promoted or taken on a new role in the last year, I invite you to apply to be on the Women Taking the Lead podcast. You will be completely anonymous, so you won't need to worry about anyone you work with listening to you talk about your challenges. This is an opportunity for you to get insights and strategies to overcome any challenges you've been faced with at work. And the other woman listening to your episode will learn from your experience and gain insights that they can use at work. You can find the link that will take you to the application in the episode description in your podcast app or at the bottom of the episode page on the Women Taking the Lead website. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
I don't really care for labels like, oh, you're a feminist or you're this or that. I don't really care for that, but I do believe that people don't realize how much I literally just encountered it yesterday when I went to lunch with all my male counterparts. Two older gentlemen, probably served at some point, came to our table and thanked us for our service, but neither of them looked at me. They only looked at the men at the table. And I brought that to the attention of my guy friends, and I was like, "Did you guys notice this?" And they're like, "No, there's no way. Maybe it was because you were sitting at the end of the table and you were so close to him." And I said, "But the guy across from me is just as close to him on that side."
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're right. He didn't." And like I said, I don't think that from an older generation that was intentional by any means. I think it was just that generation only sees men in the military. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's just little things like that. Or when I go off base and go to a doctor, they're like, "Oh, can I have your insurance card for your husband because he's in the military?" I'm like, "No, I'm in the military." You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? So it's definitely getting better. It's come so far, but those little things, not even just me, but like women across the board, like just correct it in the moment so that it does become a change. You don't have to make it this big, ginormous thing.
Yes. Jamie, you answered your own question.
Yeah.
And I
It's
love
funny
when
how
that
that happens,
happens.
right?
Yes, I love when that happens. This is how coaching is supposed to work because
Right.
the answer is within the client, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just having the conversation with you and asking questions to bring it out of
Mm-hmm.
you. But you are doing the work, right?
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're more interested in how does this get comfortable?
Yeah.
How can this not be so hard? Because you're doing it. You're
Mhm.
doing the hard work. I don't think you like that it is so uncomfortable sometimes to
Yeah,
do that.
it is hard for me because I'm such a people person and I'm such a, you know, I just took a test yesterday about leadership and your qualities and strengths, and once again I got told how empathetic I am, which I am, and I
Yeah.
embrace that. I used to not claim that because, as a woman in the military, you don't want to
Right.
be empathetic,
Not too many
you have
people
to
are
be
celebrating
strong,
that.
and but
Yes.
now, like, in a leadership position, like, especially where I'm at, that empathy goes a long way, and I love building those relationships, and I'm hesitant sometimes because I never want that conflict in that moment to ruin that relationship, but that just means it wasn't a good relationship to begin with, right?
Right.
So,
Well, to some extent, and I'm saying right, like to kind of put a period at the end of the sentence, because
yeah.
actually I'm going to take you in a different direction. Sometimes conflict is there because of the way we're looking at the situation,
Mhm.
right? When you're in the classroom and somebody is off track, right? They're saying something, but you're like, oh, that's not quite right.
Mhm.
You know, you don't perceive that as conflict that you have to correct them,
No.
right? Because it's your job, right?
Yeah.
And it's what you
Sure.
do. And when we talk about the why, you're correcting them because it saves lives,
Right. Yeah.
right? And things go well if I correct them. When you're in these situations where you're calling somebody out for their unconscious biases or
Mhm.
biases, let me say
Right.
that correctly, your unconscious biases, you're doing it for a good purpose,
Mhm.
right? So it's conflict if it's personal,
Yeah.
right? It's about me, but it's not conflict if it's about everybody, not just women too.
Agree, yeah.
Because if you think about it, your male friends, when you've pointed out things, they've been like, "Oh,
Mhm.
wow, I didn't see that before."
Right.
Right? And you did have a friend who you were addressing his behavior. He became
Mhm.
mortified, in
Yeah.
the conversation. And I know that made you uncomfortable. But let's take that a few steps after. How does he feel now that he's aware of what,
So,
what he does?
it's funny that you asked that because went different ways. He went to a new assignment. I went to a new assignment. Um, but there's been two different occasions where he's reached back to me and said that he used me as an example because of me bringing that up to him. But in a good way, not use me as an example in a bad way. But he told the
Right.
story of, I had a friend who I didn't know that I was even doing this,
Yeah.
and so, I mean, I guess just just bringing that up to him, he's already had the conversation with multiple people, so it has already spread in that aspect.
It's rippled,
Yeah.
right? You
Mhm.
course corrected him,
Yeah.
right? Or he chose to course correct after you
Mhm.
gave him some feedback, and now it's rippled out.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah, and I think that we built a good enough friendship to know that I'm like, okay, I can have this conversation with him, but really it's not a bad conversation to have. That's something that's in my own head. Like, oh, this is a bad conversation to have, but like it's really not. It's
Mm.
a good conversation to have, but I was comfortable enough with him in my friendship that I could finally talk to him about it, but it doesn't mean that you have to be the best of friends when you're in the work center or you're in a team together. You should be able to. You have to have those what are they called, crucial conversations.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Right. So you're looking at it like a crucial conversation. It doesn't have to be bad. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be personal or emotional. It's
Right.
really just almost like holding up a mirror and just
Mhm.
saying, "Hey, were you aware, you have like," or it's that like, you have something in your teeth,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
sort of thing. But if you care about the other person and you don't
Mhm.
want them walking around with something in their teeth, you would point it out to them so that they can fix that. And as much as like in the moment we might be like, "Oh my God, I have something in my teeth. I'm so embarrassed." Like
Yeah.
we're so grateful that
Sure.
somebody pointed it out to us as well. And you not only impact their life, right? Because then they have the option to course correct at that point. You impact the other women that they interact with, right? And the men that they role model for, right?
And yeah, and that's even more important because you had asked how, correlating this in the classroom with the students, and it 100% does, because now they're seeing me as like a strong, like, female figure, right? That, hey, this is how men or not even, I don't even want to say men and women, because this is just a standard, right? Everybody should be treated equally with respect. So if I start that in the classroom, then they go out into their next space, like that's a trickle, a ripple effect as well.
100%.
So we don't even have to have the male and female conversation, but just having that whole vibe in the classroom, like, hey, just because she's speaking, she gave you your turn, now you give her her turn, right? So, because I've seen that before too, where you have the male speaking over the female, but I don't even make it about male and female. It's just, hey, we're all classmates here. We're all in the classroom. We respect each other no matter what.
Yeah,
So,
I love that you take gender out of that. It's
yeah,
a behavior, right? You're
right.
talking over somebody. Stop it.
Yeah,
Right? It's a classmate. It's not a female or male.
right.
Perfect. Love that. Okay. How does that feel?
That feels better. I mean, it definitely is it goes back to my, kind of like we talked about, you make up your own scenario in your head without actually knowing the facts of the situation.
All right, Jamie. Anything else?
No, I really appreciate you having me on here. I could talk about this stuff for hours.
I could talk about it for hours too. So feel free to reach out anytime. Yeah. All right, Jamie, thank you so much for coming on. I know this is going to make a huge difference for the women who are listening to this podcast. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
What were your takeaways from this on-air coaching call? Are you in an environment where the unconscious biases of others is undermining your credibility as a leader? Head over to LinkedIn to share your thoughts and takeaways on the post corresponding to this episode. I would love to hear what stood out most for you. And if your last promotion has you experiencing and confronting challenges you haven't faced before, consider working with me. I would love to support you through this transition, help you get your bearings and feeling confident in your leadership once again. You can find a link to schedule a time to chat with me in the episode description. If you're listening through a mobile device, that link will be in your podcast app. And if you're listening through the Women Taking the Lead website, the link will be toward the bottom of the episode webpage that you're listening on. If you are going to ask your company to sponsor you to work with a coach, there's also a link to access a checklist that will help you to prepare for the conversation. As always, I hope this was of value to you, and here's to your success.